So welcome, Sauvignon Blanc. Yesterday was International Sauvignon Blanc. And again, Craig is here joining us, who's spent some time in every part of the world, I think. So
not quite, but some.
And I think everybody picked up a Sauvignon Blanc. This was an interesting week because sometimes we get questions coming in asking like, what would you suggest to pick up? Those kind of things. And this week we did not. No one asked. It was just like, I've got my wine. And I know one messaged and said that they were drinking a Kim Crawford, which is fantastic because I sat in on a webinar the other day with New Zealand talking about the views of Sauvignon Blanc alone in that area and across the world. And I discovered a little tidbit that apparently Kim Crawford is the #1 selling brand of Sauvignon Blanc in Canada right now with over 300,000 cases. Thought that was pretty. Somebody's in the chat. There's some people are just saying which they're typing in the chat what wines that they do have. And so I see one from Andrea writing in that she's drinking the Squealing Pig. Cheater, cheater, that's mine. We have some Rodney Strong from Sonoma and the Toy Toy from New Zealand as well, which is a fantastic one. Craig has a different one. I'm pretty sure I can guess that Leah has a different one too, but yes, the Yumbla from the Y series from Australia.
Yep.
One that Craig is drinking, which is also the same that Lisa is drinking. And we have some Uco Valley ones. And then another person is drinking a different wine, and that's totally okay because they ran out of Sauv Blanc. And you know, Sauv Blanc was yesterday, so perfect. You probably had some and are familiar with things that we might be touching on and talking on. Do you want to go first, Craig, or?
Yeah, I can do a little intro on the grape, and more of I'll do sort of like more general, and maybe you can. I know you have some nice props there for aromatics and flavors, so maybe you can get more detail on all the different things. But I'll talk sort of generally about the grape and the main places it comes from and general stylistic differences. So Sauvignon Blanc is another one of those Loire grapes. We had Chenin Blanc a couple weeks ago, and they both have they share some parentage, so there are similarities. It's the main grape of that part of the Loire as you move inland away from the ocean, and you get into a different terroir, and that's really where Sauvignon Blanc became really famous, particularly in Pouilly-Fumé and Sancerre, which are like the name check Sauvignon Blancs of the world, or at least they were before New Zealand got all the media attention and consumer attention as well. So those are your classic ones where they talk a lot about terroir, and the grape presents itself as a very kind of minerally and fresh grape. It makes good crisp white wines, perfect for seafood. But like with a lot of the grape, well, every grape that we end up talking about, when it goes on holiday to other countries, it changes its accent, just like I do when I go to England. And so you end up seeing quite different personalities. So yeah, it's really big still in Loire. Of course, it's huge people forget that it's the main grape of white Bordeaux, along with Semillon, or as the Aussies call it, Semillon. So you do see a lot of Sauvignon Blanc in other parts of France, Bordeaux, but also in sort of the general southern France and Vin de Pays type wines. So it's quite popular. And then it spreads a little bit in other parts of Europe, like Italy and other countries. But really, the other big places it's known are New Zealand and to some extent Australia, where it's often in the blends, and in California and other parts of the New World and South Africa. So Sauvignon Blanc is got around, and as you can imagine, the climate is a big effect on how it presents, because it's one of those grapes that's kind of green. Like Sauvignon means savage, and I guess it grows really wildly. If you, I'm not a grape grower other than for my pergola, but apparently it'll go really wild and take off. It needs to be managed quite busily. You know, you need to be on your game there. So Sauvignon has a wild personality, but it also has kind of wild flavors, that kind of herbaceous green that can really happen, especially in really cool climates. And so you see variations of that around the globe. It has to get pretty ripe before you lose all of that green. Even in the ones like in California that can be quite round, where they can make oak versions even, and kind of get away from the grassy green or gooseberry. You still get hints of it, a little bit of it, I find, even in some of those wines. So yeah, it can go that way. And then, as some of you are experiencing, if you're drinking the New Zealand ones today, that you can also get a real tropical aspect, sometimes at the same time as the really green, wild herbal or cat pee or whatever you want to call it. I think the best description I've ever heard is when you smell a boxwood plant or a currant bush when it's just in bloom, that initial smell is almost the same as many New Zealand Sauvies. So yeah, it has quite a wide personality, but the thing is that it always has is good acidity and a certain amount of an herbal green edge. And if it doesn't have that, it's really hard to recognize in a blind, like as a SOM on your exam. If they had one in there that was from a super warm climate, it'd be me, because it would be hard to recognize, and that's not fair. You know, so usually on exams, it's something that, yeah, that's Sauvignon Blanc, you know right away, take one sniff. So I like it for that. It's a bold, pungent variety, and some people don't like that, so but that's fine. So it's one of those grapes that splits roots. So that's my take on it, Charlotte. I think you can talk maybe a bit about that, why it smells that way a bit more, or details of other smells that can have and taste. What do you think?
Absolutely. I'm not sure if someone on the call, such as Andrea or Heather, could flip that link to Natalie. She's having difficulty getting in. It worked for all of you guys. Yeah, in terms of Sauvignon Blanc, like, you know, if I was gonna go a little nerdy on it, like the things that you're smelling, they're broken down into things like your thiols and your pyrazines. And like the pyrazines, they start to decrease off as the grape's ripening, but you have to let the grape kind of hang out there in a ripe area and to get those thiols to boost up. And pyrazines are kind of like those, you get some citrusy, but it's more your leafy. So if you were comparing, it'd be like that black leaf currant, like black currant leaf versus black currant. Black currant would be more the thiol, and the leafy note would be more that pyrazine. And so for the winemaker, again, I call them magicians all the time. It does come down to their climate and stuff like that. She's in. And then, but it comes down to looking at that. And there's like main pyrazines that you'd be looking at, and those are like your sulfur compound ones that are giving you that, like that cabbage, maybe even that like actual sulfur compound. So like in small doses it's good, but in higher doses it's a fault in your wine. And then looking at things like the 3MH, those are things that are giving you that the passion fruit, still it's giving you some fruity, some florals, but it's giving you those leafy notes, like those grassy notes. And then on the thiols, you're looking at the mecaphnol, which if you've ever worked in a lab and you've worked with beta mecaphnol, that's like, I mean, it's chemical, you should not inhale that, but it's like the extreme end of that grassy note that you would pick up. And so those things, you'd be looking at them. And again, those decrease as they're ripening. And so when you're looking at the areas in the world that grow Sauvignon Blanc, those things kind of come into play whether before they really even thought of them that way or not. And so you're looking at France, which has a cooler climate. The pyrazines aren't going to necessarily go off as quickly, but you're not going to get as many of those fruity and flavor things like that. And then on the other side, if you're looking at places like New Zealand, for instance, which they've now kind of cornered that market on this very vibrant, exuberant, aromatic Sauvignon Blanc. And in terms of that, they have, even though it's a cooler climate, they have such incredibly long days that sunlight can come in and you can really ripen those grapes. And so that's why I think in those particular wines, you get more aromatics in it, because you're still maintaining those pyrazine notes, those leafy and green notes, and then you're still getting those fruity and floral notes. But because of that extra long days, but the climate's still what they would deem a cooler climate, it's all stretching that growing season out. So everything just comes together in a perfect way that it might not necessarily in another zone region. One of the things too with Sauvignon Blanc, it's really one of those grapes that depends on the soil that it's grown in. So if you grow it in like heavy soils like clay and things like that, you get less kind of impressive grapes. They kind of are just like, meh, it's a grape. Where if you're in those soils that are like really good drainage, maybe not as fertile, the grapes will actually grow better. And then also it's one of those grapes that you may hear that people will put them on like low producing rootstock because they're trying to keep the vigor of the grape down. And so if you're looking at really fertile areas, but at the same time, it's a grape that really can show the terroir of what you're drinking and where it's been grown. So if you're looking at things like in France, if you're looking at Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé, and then you have the Loire Valley. Loire Valley is kind of like that classic, it's crisp, it's green, herbaceous, but there's not like a lot of like real fruit notes that are jumping off of it. But then if you go and look at something that's like Pouilly-Fumé, you're getting those more almost like steely, possibly a spicy note to it. And that's kind of, it's the same grape, but it's coming from how it's grown. And then that's kind of why if you look at California now, you might see things that are done in a Fumé style, and they might not even call it Sauvignon Blanc. They might call it the Fumé Blanche or Fumé Blanc. And what they're trying to tell you is that maybe these have seen some oak, maybe we're adding a little bit more character to it. And one of those things too, when you see something like a Sauvignon Blanc, and if you're in your head thinking New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, it's jumping out of the glass at you and you have all these aromas. But if you add oak to it, and even if it's old oak, so it's not going to impart a lot of flavor to it, you're still oxidizing a bit. And those things like thiols, those delicate aromas, they don't like to be oxidized, and then they're gone. And so you can kind of tell when you're drinking a wine, is it really aromatic? Maybe it's a little bit muted. Can that lead you to maybe they used old oak instead of using, stainless steel on it to preserve and keep things at a cooler temperature. So those are all things that you can think about when you're drinking it. You can also just think about if you like your wine. That's totally acceptable as well. But yeah, looking at those like classic things where you're getting like the France is kind of more that elegant, more restrained, and then you're going into New Zealand, and even if you're looking at Australia, and like the main two regions is like Margaret River and Adelaide Hills, and Adelaide is kind of like that area where they've set themselves apart. And in theory, if you drank Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc, you should know that's what it is. But in terms of like flavors and aromas that you would be getting, and I know we have a lot of different wines on the talk today, but typically you're getting that lime, that bright citrus notes. You might not classify it as gooseberry because you might not know what a gooseberry smells like. I mean, we occasionally get them here, but again, you can't say something that you're smelling if you've never actually smelled it. And one of the things I did is this spring, again, but I was successful, I got lemongrass plants. So I actually have one that's right here behind me that I brought over. And this morning I was like sitting here and I was like being really mean to it. and I like ripped off a leaf, and I was crushing it so that I could actually smell what it is. And yeah, it's lemon, but it's like spicy lemon, but with grass to it. So now when I smelt my wine, I was like, that's lemongrass? Because I didn't know. I've had lemongrass cooked and things, but it tastes completely different. It smells different when you cook it. And so for this one, I am using the Squealing Pig, which is from Marlborouggh's, and it's the 2017 vintage. And I will tell you, I bought it. I don't typically buy New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc because unless I think it's going to be something different. Because for me, if it's from New Zealand and it's a Sauvignon Blanc, it's very similar, and I'll pay 20 versus 25 unless I know that it's going to be something different. Now this one is 25. Aroma and palette, I'm not going to say it's a whole lot different than what I'd be expecting from Marlborough, but that label. And I'll throw pictures of the label up on the Facebook event after. But for anybody who had nursery rhymes told to them as a kid, this one says, this little pig went to market, it's crossed out and says Marlborough. This little pig stayed home. This little pig had roast beef, cool fermentation. This little pig had none, minimal handling. This little pig went wee, wee, wee. And I thought the wee, 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 even though it goes with the little pig story, a lot of people who drink Sauvignon Blanc are like, oh, I don't want something that smells like asparagus or cat pee. And when you say those words, people are like, yeah, I don't want that either. But when it's done right and it's in balance, it's a good thing. We used to have plants when we first bought this house, a shrubbery outside, and I didn't know at the time, every time I'd open my window down in the basement, I was like, oh my God, did the cat pee outside of his litter box? And I would go hunting, and then I finally clued in that it was this bush that was outside, and it didn't live much longer than that. But so when you're drinking Sauvignon Blanc, again, most of the time, and maybe Craig can touch base on that one, you want to drink it young. They do get some bottle aging, but again, that aging process is going to take away from those thiol, those crisp notes that you probably like in your Sauvignon Blanc. And if you're in Alberta and you have a chance to go to one of the small little, mom and pop places that they have, just really be mindful of what you're buying and look. Make sure it wasn't in direct sunlight in their store, and don't buy the 2011 that's standing upright.
Well, that's a very good point about the aging. We talk. You think about it. When have you ever had an old Sauvignon Blanc? Whether it was, in your group tastings with your wine friends or for an event or anything. The only time I would say would be aged Bordeaux white, but that's heavily oak. In Bordeaux they have the light, fresh ones with no or very little oak that are meant to drink right away, and then they have the really expensive ones, often from the the chateaus, Chateau de whatever, that are you can drink young, but they are designed to be aged. But they're so different, right? Because of the oak. And I know that some of I've been to California a few times and had the top ones from Mondavi, which are incredible wines. I'm not sure I would pay the sticker price for them for their top ones, like the Tocolon, like the single vineyard one. But those ones can definitely age. But I don't think of Sancerre and Pouilly as a wine you would age very long, and I don't think of New Zealand ones either. Yeah, you're right.
In my mind, I feel like the Pouilly Fumé would be the ones that if I was going to age something, it would be one of those styles. And possibly if it had already had seen some oak, that could be interesting too. Now, in New Zealand, one of the things I've noticed recently is a lot of the Sauvignon Blancs are coming up with higher percentage alcohols. And that's because they have a really warm climate. And if you have warm and you get sugar, sugar equals alcohol. So I don't know if it's going to be a trend or not, but I did see a wine that arrived in New Brunswick, and I've forgotten the name, but when I picked it up, I was like, oh, I'm going to get that. And then I turned it over, as I always do, because I look at the alcohol content. And it said 9%. And I was like, And I didn't buy it because it was 9% and I wanted like a boozy wine. I didn't buy it because I wanted Sauvignon Blanc. And I didn't know if this meant it might be a little bit on the sweet side. because it was new, didn't know anything about it. So I was like, lower percentage can sometimes mean it has a higher sugar content in it. They left residual sugar there. And so that night for supper, we were having seafood, and I didn't want to chance getting something that wouldn't necessarily pair well. But pairing well, Sauvignon Blanc is right up there because it has such great acidity. It pairs with a lot of different foods. So you'll see a lot of people drinking it in the summertime, especially because it goes really well with salads. I mean, maybe if you put like a super creamy sauce on it, it might not. But even then, in my head, I was like, no, I would eat this still with a blue cheese, like salad dressing kind of thing. And so it's crisp, it's refreshing, they're typically light. They can go in that medium bodied style, but again, it comes down to how it's done. This one I'm drinking, it's leaning towards the medium body side, but it's interesting in how they actually made this wine. Because most of the times, Craig and I have already touched on, you don't see a lot of oaking on things, and don't really see a lot of that, certainly like leaving it on the lees to get more flavors from. But in this case, they actually do put it on ambient yeast, and ambient means it's not their commercial yeast, it's just yeast from the vineyard. How they do that, I'm not sure. But it kind of gives it a little bit more texture. It's not creamy. The acidity is really like bright and vibrant in this, but you can tell it's a little bit different. There's a little bit more complexity to this one. For me, I got like specifically, I got the lemongrass, I got lime, but again, it's not just like lime, like your lime citrus. It's like the green lime, that kaffir lime, like you would cook with or something like that, or make a sauce with. And then also there's herbaceous to it. So I wouldn't call it cut grass, though I can't wait to have that smell floating around in the neighborhood. But it's also a little bit floral. And one of the things I said to Craig early when we first came on is I have a little cheat glass here, and it's not accurate, but this is elderflower. So I put some Saint Germain into a glass, and it's just been sitting here because I didn't want to have the alcohol right up in my face. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can actually smell that in my wine. But again, I don't know what elderflower smells like other than Saint Germain. So I was excited today before we got on. I'm like, I have props. I can't share my screen yet, but I've got props. So this one, it's the squealing pig. I'll hold that right up there like this. And it's got a fun little label on the front. It's got an equally fun label on the back. So to me, that was like piqued my interest in, for the extra $4, $5 on a bottle. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna give you a try. And I have bought this one since. But the aromas on it are quite strong. The color, and I'm gonna say this because I know Andrea is drinking this as well, pale lemon with green hues to it. It's like, I would almost have to classify it as a yellow-green.
How's the acid?
Really strong.
Yeah.
It's really mouth-watering.
Okay.
Like if I was doing one of those tasting 101 classes, I'd have a mug here and like put my face over it, but it's really crisp, bright. You're feeling it in every facet of your mouth, which is incredible but it's almost on like the tingly side. So there's no effervescence, there's no petulance in the glass or in the bottle, but it almost feels like you're getting like something like that along your like back of your gum lines, on your tongue, and on your cheeks, which I find is really intriguing. But again, in terms of like aromas, it's coming like right out of the glass for me, and I haven't even like spun this around here. But yeah, it's like right about here. So I'm like medium plus intensity. It's definitely high acid. The flavors on it are everything that I'm smelling. There's a lot of lemon. There's a lot of kind of grassy notes. Like I don't feel like I'm eating a plant, but unless maybe it was a really good plant, because I mean, we do eat salad, but that's not what it tastes like.
Do you mind? So I've got the Yalumba Y series, which is from South Australia, kind of cool climate. They don't say specifically, like it's not a single vineyard, but I don't believe, but it's that area does have some cool terroir. Yalumba is I think, a very dependable winery. I haven't had anything bad from them. I always like their Grenache. They've had bush trained Grenache at ANBL before, and I think there's a kind of GSM Grenache Syrah Mourvedre blend or a Syrah Grenache from them there as well, which I think is a really good wine. But I find this style now, sometimes in Australia they do lean almost to that New Zealand style where you have that confusing mix of tropical and green, which when I was in New Zealand, I did go to a Sauvignon Blanc tasting seminar where we were tasting wine components. And they were talking about, there was the Kim Crawford winemaker was there, and a few others who were in that same group who own a bunch of wineries in New Zealand and elsewhere, Constellation at the time. But they talked about how the way that they would get everything into a Sauvignon Blanc like Kim Crawford is by blending from different vineyards in different parts. So there was vineyards they knew. That vineyard gives passion fruit. That vineyard gives the green, grassy, lemongrass, whatever you want to call it. That vineyard is more of the minerality, kind of Loire-like. And then that one is the funky, pungent, really cappy one. And then there's like the grapefruit BO, body odor, which when you put it in someone's mind, BO, and you smell it, they're like, oh my God, it smells like someone's armpit. But if you say grapefruit peel and they smell, oh, grapefruit, yeah, I love grapefruit. It's the same smell. It's the same, I don't know the name of that particular company, but it's the same one that smells like.
I could tell you. It's
BO and grapefruit. What's that?
I said it's 3-MH. It's 3-mercapthohexanol.
Yeah. It's anyway, it's appealing smelling in amounts, but if there's too much of any of those components, like I've had some New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs that taste like jalapeno and have no fruit, and I don't like those. No, whereas this one, the Yalumba one, it really feels to me like it's trying to be more like Sancerre. Somebody else has it there, I think. It's, to me, on the nose, I get right away that flinty thing you mentioned and minerality. I mean, usually when people say flinty, it actually means a bit of sulfur, and that's normal in young wines, a lot of young, particularly white wines. But it's more than just that. The flinty means it's kind of a mineral note, and no, it doesn't mean that minerals from the rocks are going up into the wine and giving you that aroma and flavor. It's not what's happening, even if the soil is flinty. But there's definitely that, and then it's more of the citrus, but not there's no tropical, there's none of that that kind of stuff, and the green is not the pungent kind of boxwood plant, or like you had mentioned, the currant bush. It's the same smell. And I had a very similar experience to Charlotte, where I was at my friends who run one of the national wine competitions. They used to live in Windsor, and we were there at the opening greeting party at their house. And I went out in their backyard, and we were having a drink, and I'm like, you got a problem with cats peeing around your house here? It was so strong, it was unbearable. And he goes, oh, no, it's just it was a boxwood bush was in bloom. And I was like, holy, that it smells exactly like, and I was, litter box duty in those days. We put the emphasis on duty. But anyway, yeah. So I don't get that in this. I find the Yalumba one is a really good, one of those in-between wines that's in between Old World and New World, so it has more fruit than probably the Sancerre, but not as over the top as New Zealand. And some of the New Zealand ones can actually have a fair amount of residual sugar, like Kim Crawford. It has enough that I notice it. It doesn't mean it tastes bad, but it's part of the profile, and I think it enhances reading of the wine when you have a bit of sugar. So there's a reason why they do it. They know what they're making. They're making a wine to be the #1 selling Sauvignon Blanc maybe in the world. Definitely up there. Oh, and I wanted to make one little comment. You were talking about the low alcohol Sauvignon Blanc. Mm-hmm. The only time I've had like 11 and 9% Sauvies have been from Nova Scotia, and they were legit. Like there's a small amount of Sauvignon Blanc in Nova Scotia. Benjamin Bridge has made one. I think Lightfoot and Wilfil maybe, but going with only natural sugar from the grapes, that's all they can get in alcohol. I mean,
It
you
is
could argue,
Benjamin Bridge.
you could
They're,
argue that they shouldn't do it because they're not getting to, I mean, you almost want to say at least 11 and a half for a wine before. I mean, you should be chaptalizing it. You should be adding some sugar and bringing, the reason the French always did that for Burgundy was to bring the body and flavor of the wine up into the agreeable range for texture and flavor, carrying the flavor reasons. It wasn't because they were trying to cheat to make more alcohol. It's just a known technique, just like they take alcohol out in California, they add it in bad vintages or cooler vintages, or they used to before global warming. But yeah, so I remember that 9, I've had those 9 and 10% alcohol Sauvignon Blancs, and yeah, they're really green. But if you like really green Sauvignon Blanc, they're really high acid too, not shockingly. And yeah, with the right food, those wines are really interesting, but they were challenging for sure. Like, we're talking lean. 9% bone dry? That's
right?
lean.
So, and I didn't know because it could go either way. So then I was just like, that's for another day.
No, the Benjamin Bridge one would be bone dry.
Oh, the Benjamin Bridge one, I have had the pleasure of trying that one. And it is really dry. I believe in 2018 was the year that they kind of first released it, because it's kind of becoming what they hope to be an estate wine. And I don't know if everybody knows the story about Benjamin Bridge or not, but his wife is no longer, and she loved Sauvignon Blanc.
Yes.
And so that's how this wine, like, they're still trying to create a vintage that would be worthy of her. So that's like a right in the heart kind of thing. So awesome. And if you happen to, like, I think you can only get it at the winery. I got it because I know them and they brought me one.
You can join the wine club and get them shipped to you. Benjamin Bridge will ship across the country. But you know, I actually had a lot of the earlier vintages of that wine. In the early days, they've always had that Sauvignon Blanc there, but they wouldn't make wine every year, and they never made it, like you say, it was not a commercial wine.
Yep.
It was not available for sale. But in those early days when we were visiting the winery before they had even released wines, and then in the ensuing years, I was at one tasting where we had 3 different vintages of that unreleased wine, and they were, each of them were so, because of, people talk about vintage variation, but in California they don't know what vintage variation means. Nova Scotia, they got vintage variation. So one of them tasted like New Zealand. One of them was like devoid of anything but acid, and then the other one was kind of like Loire. But when the vintage was, when it was warm enough, it, you know, it made a great wine. But you wouldn't be commercially viable to try to base a winery on, in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, for that matter, on a grape like Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc, because there'd be too many years where you couldn't make one, you know, make a good viable commercial wine.
And that's kind of important. So kind of like a synopsis of what we were talking about. Sauvignon Blanc can be so expressive, and it can go from just being crisp and just all the green flavors to things that have tropical fruit notes in it. So understanding like where it's grown and what that climate is can pare down what your particular flavors and what you like in a Sauvignon Blanc. And then in terms of aging, drink young, sure. Like, I definitely lay stuff down because I want to like see, just, you know, does it make it better, or does it make it better to me personally, but maybe not everybody else? Those are kind of the fun things to look at. It goes with all your foods that you want because it has such high acid in it, which is fantastic. But then in looking in terms of budgeting and what you're going to spend, like, your most expensive ones are going to be New Zealand, just because that's what their climate, that's what their market demands. Then you're going to be looking at things like the poulet fumé from France, and especially if they're here in New Brunswick, which they rarely ever are, then you'd be looking at like ones from the US that are done in that style, because the US again has created the market for that, and they're demanding that price point. And then you're looking at things like, they make Sauvignon Blanc elsewhere. South Africa has good ones. Australia has good ones. So Chile has good ones, like South America. I think somebody was drinking one either from Chile or Argentina as well. And some flavors you can kind of like take from. So if it's a cool area, you're going to get those more crisp notes. If it's a slightly warmer area, you're going to get those warmer, like those stone fruit, the peach notes that are coming up into it. So it's like, think about those things when you're buying it, especially like if you're thinking South America, you're going, oh, that's a warm place. Well, I want these crispness. Well, it changes in elevation. And so the higher up vineyards planted, the cooler technically it is, and then they still get more light hours. So then I find that if you're grabbing something from Chile, you're gonna find it's similar in nose and palate to something from New Zealand versus something that you'd pick up in the US, for instance. And then because it has, one of the things Craig mentioned is about Bordeaux. Sauvignon Blanc will be used sometimes as a blend grape for things like Semillon in Australia and in France area, because it's a fuller bodied wine, but it doesn't necessarily have a whole lot to it. And so the zinginess of this Sauvignon Blanc and that crisp acidity helps that wine to age a bit longer, because Semillon is one of those wines that can age, and it gets those really cool, like honey notes to them and become really complex and more rich. But it couldn't do that if it didn't have something to keep that acid backbone in there. It would just kind of go flat. And so I find it might not, Sauvignon Blanc isn't the wine that I go out and buy every single day. Yes, I do carry Sauvignon Blancs usually in my house. Like this is actually the only bottle of Sauvignon Blanc that I have in my house right now. But that's solely because, I drank the other ones already because I don't keep that one. So this one was really fun to try. And one of the things when Craig was talking and I was still kind of swishing around, I went back and wrote some more notes down on this, and I was like, there's like a mineral note, but then it feels like there's like some titch of spice. And because of all the green flavors, I wrote down jalapeno, but I don't know if it's like jalapeno spice, but there's something there, and it's on the very back end of the palate. And I haven't had a sip of this for a bit, and I can still taste those lemons and that citrus in my mouth.
I think Sauvignon Blanc is a great grape for people who like kind of an explosive, aromatic white wines. And I've met people who absolutely hate it, and because they find it too pungent a lot of the time. I mean, I'm sure if I gave them one of those California ones that you were talking about, they'd probably go, oh, that's really nice. So that's fine, because it doesn't taste like Sauvignon Blanc. But yeah, if you get a textbook one, like your New Zealand, typical New Zealand one, or even the basic one, like somebody mentioned, Les Fumées Blanches, which is from Lurton in France, but I think it's the best, the most real Sauvignon Blanc we have at AMBL, and it's only, I think, $17 or something. But it tastes to me like when you read in a textbook what Sancerre is supposed to taste like, but you'd have to pay $35 to hundreds of dollars for a top Sancerre. But that Fumée Blanche to me is textbook what I look for in a Sauvignon Blanc. Dry, but also fruity, grapefruit, mineral, flinty. I really love that wine, and I love the price. But Yalumba is the one that I use today because it's a newer one that I'm like, oh, this is also the type that I'm really looking forward to drinking on a regular basis.
That one with you.
Yeah, and New Zealand, unfortunately, the price point, it hurts it in our market, even though they're still quite popular. Like when I'm buying sort of regular wine for drinking, I drink Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. And sometimes Argentina, I really like the Norton. But I find that for $15 to $16, or maybe but under $20 in Chile, get you a wine that I like as much as the $25 New Zealand ones. So we're not exactly the same.
Sure. Because before COVID happened and I was doing private events, some of them were the wine tasting, and some people just want to be like, how do I go and confidently buy a bottle of wine without breaking the bank? And so they wanted to know how to buy a bottle of wine that's under $20. And one of the things I would use is grab a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc and be like, because you can't really buy a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand under 20, but you can, and here's this one, and it's this price. But one of the things I picked up on the webinar I was listening to about the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is it's typical. So you're not offending anybody who is thinking Sauvignon Blanc in their head. If they go into a restaurant and they see a wine, they might not know the wine, but they see that it's New Zealand and they see that it's Sauvignon Blanc. They're like, oh, I know what that is. And it's comfortable. And then they went on to say that it's one of the wines that are used for testing because it's easy. Not that it's easy, but it's distinct to be identified. Like, if somebody served me a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, I should know with how I've studied now that it is a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. I shouldn't mess it up at all. Now, if I had to go down and say, is it from Marlborough or from Hawke's Bay or Martin, I don't know if I could do that. Maybe I could, because there's climate differences. But the same thing in terms of looking at the Loire Valley. That Sauvignon Blanc from that area is also one of those classical, typical, this is what it should taste like from this region. And I find that's really interesting because if you put the two of them together, you'd be like, am I drinking the same grape? Because they are so different.
True. And it's I think I can remember one time where I had a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand that somebody was pouring at a tasting. And I was like, I cannot believe this is from New Zealand. It didn't have any of the markers. I can't remember who it was now. This was quite a while ago, but it was a Canadian winemaker she had gone to New Zealand and made her name there. But she had the regular one. There were small wineries, so it's not a famous one. I don't know if it's ever been at AMBL. But they had their entry level one tasted like typical New Zealand, but the reserve one was trying to be more like the Loire. So whatever they were doing in the vineyard and the winery, they were avoiding all those things that we use as markers. Well, I thought that was rather funny. So their reserve, their more premium one, is one that somebody who loves New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc would be happy about. But somebody who's a sommelier who was, went through the training and was brainwashed, if you will, that Sancerre is the epitome. Brainwashing happens in everything. So
a fun little experiment that you guys can do, because there are a few things, like in Chile, there's the Razares winery. They do like a base and a reserve. So if you have the funds and the interest, you could buy one and the other and try them side by side to see what that's like. And the same thing, I believe we still have that option with Matua from New Zealand. They had one that's like Hawke's Bay, and then they have one that's Marlborough. So it's made by the same winery, but in two different regions to kind of see like how those differ. Mm-hmm. I always think that's a cool thing, but again, I started off with the pyrazines and the thiols, so.
Well, tasting,
as you will.
Comparative tasting is how you learn. That's how you learn in depth. You can learn about wine and get a really good sort of basic knowledge and be comfortable. But if you really want to start getting the nitty gritty details, then you have to do a lot of that kind of tasting, preferably blind. So where, you might have 6 wines, and these are all Sauvignon Blancs. 2 of them, there's 2 each from a different country, but they're from these different regions, and you have to go in and using what you know and by tasting back and forth and eliminating things and get it right. And until you can do that, shouldn't be thinking about becoming a master somm or those kind of crazy things, which I, decided not to do quite a long time ago. I just stayed my own basic plain somm.
I'm working on it.
It is so hard to get to that level of detail of tasting. I'm really comfortable that I can describe something accurately, but the level of knowledge that's required to know by regional breakdowns and remembering all the different markers and then, correlating those with your taste notes is a whole level of skill.
Hence the pyrazines and the thiols. And also, a lot of people, you would not know that my husband is a chemist. And I worked in the science field when we first met. However, when I was in university, I was studying to become a biochemist. And at one point, my organic chemistry teacher just sat me down. And he was like, he didn't say honey, but that's how I'm going to say it. He was like, honey, I don't think this is for you. And I like excelled in the inorganic and the thermodynamic chemistry and the other things, but I could not pass organic chemistry. So my friends Leah on the call, she might think it's funny, but I also didn't know geography. And now that I've been learning about wine and going through my certifications, I now know where mountains are in which country and what that means. And now I'm like, I'm gonna learn organic chemistry now. So for me, that's kind of funny because I always thought, I'm like, just give up. There's no way, you can't do that. But now I'm apparently associating it with something that I love, and it makes it easier to be like, oh, that's what that means. So we have some questions, I think, coming in. Other people hated organic chemistry. Yeah, thank you. Does anybody want to unmute and then just say briefly about what their wines? I think somebody said that they had the Toi Toi from New Zealand.
I think Vasan.
Yeah, that's me. I don't know if it's reversed or not. Great wine. I don't normally drink Sauvignon Blanc, but it's very good, very balanced. I'd say moderate plus acid. I'm enjoying it.
It's got the tropical stuff, I think, doesn't it? If I recall correctly.
It does, yeah.
It's like mango or passion fruit or something like that.
And then I see
it's definitely tropical. I don't know if I would say I couldn't discern if it's mango or passion fruit or something like that, but it's definitely tropical, I would say.
The next time you go to the grocery store, you have to pick up a mango and a passion fruit. And
then like,
you know, when you're allowed to touch the fruit that you're not actually then going to buy.
Yeah.
I actually sent a note out that, so I'm drinking the Rodney Strong, and I had actually saved it because it's a 2015, so I would have drank it a long time ago, but a good friend of mine that lives in Toronto, her name is Charlotte, and we were supposed to have met in PEI 2 years ago, and then last year, so I've saved it. So I thought I would drink it in Charlotte's honor today. So here's to you. And I'm not getting any tropical fruit at all.
Okay.
But definitely acidic, mineral, and quite, it's fresh and well balanced. So once everything is lifted, and if I can make it to Fredericton, I'll deliver a bottle to you.
Fantastic. And then I see Lisa, you were drinking the one that Craig's drinking. Did you find anything different?
No, I love it. I actually just discovered it recently. And before that, I was a big Erasures fan, both of the ones that you were talking about, but the cheaper one is just great. I'm just curious why Craig, you think the Fumé Blanche is the best Sauvignon Blanc available. I've had it too, and I find it flat compared to both the Yalumba and the Erasures. Like there's nothing. So am I missing something? Because this one is very floral. The Yalumba, I feel like the Erasures is more
it's not done in that style.
Curious why you think
where I arrived at that was doing blind tasting. So when I'm doing my columns and doing my end of year like top 100 list, I'll get a bunch of wines that I've had before, or if they're new and I think they might be good, and then I blind taste them, and that's how I arrived at that. So basically, by doing a blind evaluation, it was like, this is the one that stands out above all the others. Now, I will say that, vintage variation can happen with every wine. So it's very possible that there's a new vintage of that wine that has come in since that time. I'm not sure. I would have to check my notes, but the last time I did it in any sort of blind, it had this incredible grapefruit flavors and really well-balanced, great acidity, and it was very, like I say, French Loire tasting, the minerality and vintage. But, bottle variation can happen, and vintage variation certainly can happen. So
Okay, and just one more comment on the Rodney Strong. I was surprised. I was wondering, where did you find that? Because I know we don't get very many Rodney Strongs here. I love the Rodney Strong Cabernet Sauvignon. So I'm glad you said that you didn't get it here, because then I was kind of jealous. But anyway.
I actually got it at the liquor depot in Salisbury again.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes, but probably 3 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, I don't even, sometimes there's a Rodney Strong Chardonnay and a Cab Sauv at the liquor store here, but other than that, not much. But anyway, just curious. Thank you.
So I'm lucky enough that I do travel between Halifax and Fredericton quite often for business, and sometimes there's great finds there, and sometimes I don't find anything, but this was a good one for sure.
I'd love to.
Someone here also has a wine from Argentina.
Which does, sorry?
Oh, I was just saying someone on our call has a wine from Argentina. Would they like to talk about that one?
So that's me. It's Blazon San Carlos. It's actually a 2013, which kind of surprised me. I didn't realize that I still had some, but it has held very well. On the nose, it's got a lot of minerality, and it's got sort of that cut grass aroma, but then the flavor is very much sort of a ripe lemon drop on the palate. So it's got nice acidity. It's very nicely balanced. It's probably a medium body. I did look it up just to see, and it would have been harvested, like it's quite high above sea level there where they would have harvested this. So 900 to 1500 meters above sea level. And so cool nights would have allowed the grapes to retain their acidity. So it's drinking nicely. It's a lot like a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc for sure. And I know that it wasn't the same price as a New Zealand or Sauvignon Blanc. So, but it's lovely.
I remember when that one.
We have someone
I remember
with
that when I've had it, but I can't remember. It was a while ago, so I probably only had it when it was first released here. But
fun. We also have a couple people I think, trying the Whitehaven. Does anybody want to speak to that?
Oh, I'll jump in, Charlotte. As I mentioned before, I guess in prior calls, that my wife was the one that introduced me to more wines and good tasting red wines. To be honest, I've become a little saturated with red wine, and I've been switching more to some of the whites. And this one I've had at the Rossmount Inn, and I'm pretty sure it might have been at Christmas with a seafood. It's absolutely excellent with seafood. And as far as tasting goes, we've been kind of talking about this, and we're kind of on the same page, but I find that as the bottle sits here and warms up through this call, I get a strong lime, not a cut lime, but the smell of a lime whole on the scent, on the smell, and on the initial taste. But as the wine warms up, sitting on the table here, you get more of the floral notes as it warms up, which is really interesting. And we've been eating a little bit of brie and cracker with it, so it's kind of like a nice little combo. So it's a very nice wine. I've only had it once or twice before, but I really like it.
Excellent.
it's on sale right now.
Oh, sorry, Craig.
I think it was on a reduced price at AMVL when I was there this week. So
Yeah, $2 off.
Offered. Yeah.
Nice. Now I like the interesting comment that you made about how it's warming up. You're getting different aromas and things, and that's exactly true. And with any wine, not just Sauvignon Blanc, that is something that you should expect to see as a wine warms up. And having had a bar before, a lot of people like their white wines like cold to like too cold to even smell anything. Cold will actually mute your flavors or your aromas on it. And so sometimes you would see like, yeah, it's cold because that's what the customer wants, but I'll warm up a glass by holding it this way so that I can actually smell it. And when we do our exam wines, they're actually pretty close to room temperature. So they can kind of change overall. And so sometimes like I didn't get up and put this back in the fridge, like it's warming up as it's sitting here. But even with that, like you're saying that you could get more floral, definitely true. because I have that elderflower coming off of here, which before I wouldn't have known it was elderflower, but I have my cheek glass over here to compare. And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm smelling now. And so it's interesting because when you're tasting things, the alcohol is bringing the compound to your mouth, but as the alcohol leaves, that's when you can identify what that compound is, that flavor that you're actually tasting. So it's kind of interesting that way. And
Of
then
course, when if there's defects or something bad, then you'll notice it more when it warms up too, which is part of the reason. Yeah, the labs do when they're doing defect analysis for wines for technical purposes. That we don't. When I judge the national competitions, we try to do them at the proper temperature, like cellar temp. But if it's in a lab and you're looking to find defects, then you would do it at warmer temperature, because then you can smell what's going wrong.
Did anyone else on the call who has a wine that hasn't spoken yet, would you like to say anything about your wine? If you do, you just have to unmute yourself. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Everybody seems to be good. So we've been just an hour or so talking about Sauvignon Blanc. And I'd like to say thank you so much for everybody coming in and joining Craig and I with this. Craig, if you didn't know, he writes a column for the Telegraph Gleaner, and it comes out every Friday, is it, Craig?
It's every two weeks now, but during the COVID, they've had a lot of issues, so it's been random. It might be out Monday, perhaps.
So grab a paper. If you have an online subscription, go in, and you can usually find it just by searching his name. We both have our YouTube channels, so I'll drop that in as well so you can find them. Craig also does beer tastings with Jillian from Uncorked Pours, which is fantastic. And he does his own reviews, as I do. And then I also feel like I need to put, like, if I knew how to write disclaimer along the back of my screen, I would. I do feel like I just need to say Fumée Blanche is in my portfolio, which is one of the reasons I didn't do it today on the call, because I felt like that was a mixed thing. But it's typically the wine that I drink every day because it's $16 and I can drink a $16 bottle of wine every day if I want to, and not a 25 one. But
I didn't realize that was your
wine.
wine.
There so that you would know. And I drank it before it was in my portfolio. That's also what I wanted to say. And Craig wasn't paid to say what he said.
No, I usually forget who reps what in this province. Some of them I know because the agents have been doing them. I've been doing this for 20 years now in the newspaper, so I know a lot of the longtime agents, but there's a lot of shifting around too, so sometimes I have no idea who's repping.
I just want to toss that in there as clarity and being like, I didn't pay for this advertisement.
Well, I want to go and taste that wine now to see whether it's changed, since the last time I tasted it. Because my column this week is on Sauvignon Blanc, and I intentionally did all New World, so I didn't have Fumée Blanche in my blind tasting.
From a personal standpoint, because I had it yesterday on Sauvignon Blanc Day, it's definitely grapefruit with mineral, but it's not super grassy.
No.
That's like a synopsis. Anyway, what are we going to be doing next week? People who are on this call, the link that you have, whatever worked for you to get in, that will work again.
And what grade?
Send me your email address, and I can also send one blanket email out to everybody with it. Would be fantastic. And next week, did we talk about doing Cab next week or a blend?
Yeah, like Cabernet blends or Cab Sauv or Cab Sauv blends. So that allows Bordeaux, or if you want to do Cabernet from anywhere, or a blend. Yeah.
I think the Timberline Merlot is on sale right now this week too. It's not mine. I just remembered looking. But so I'm just reading the questions. Will be there one next week? Yes, there will be one next week. What's the grape? We're going to go with Cabernet. Maybe I'll just write that into the comments.
Cabernet and blends, yeah.
Cabernet Sauvignon or blend thereof.
One of my favorite topics.
There we go. And so again, thank you everybody for popping in. If you haven't subscribed to the Cork Facebook page, please do. If you haven't subscribed to Craig Penny, Atlantic Writers, Spirits, and Atlantic Wine,
The channel really needs subscribers.
the big long one, subscribe to his. Please show the love. And then also, if you see these and you want to share it out to some of your friend base that might like wine and be interested, we can fit more people on the call. So more the merrier is how we look at it. So thank you for coming. Everybody have a great day. I see some people's backgrounds and it looks really sunny.
Yeah. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. Bye, guys.
Bye.